Trial Deck 1 Blaster Blade and Trial Deck 2 Dragonic Overlord were released on February 26, 2011 in Japan and were the first two products to be officially released for the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game. These decks introduced the Royal Paladin and Kagero clans used by Aichi Sendo and Toshiki Kai in the anime. With many of the cards having simplistic or no effects, new players could focus on getting a good grasp of the basic rules of the game. Fans of the anime will recognize the two iconic units featured in these decks, Blaster Blade and Dragonic Overlord, which played an important role in their respective clans during this time. These two cards would eventually become staples in decks that would later dominate the format and change the game forever. In this series, I will be opening one box of every main trial deck, booster set, and extra or clan booster set released in the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game. I will build a deck and play a best 2 out of 3 against decks that have actually topped in past formats, and if I win, I will receive a small prize to upgrade my deck. However, in each new episode, I will open another box of the next product that was released, moving in chronological order, constantly upgrading my deck before going up against the champions of the past at the end of each episode. This is Cardfight Vanguard Overtime. Welcome to the first episode of Cardfight Vanguard Overtime. If you've ever seen the Yu-Gi-Oh! Progression series or the History of Yu-Gi-Oh! Series done by SEMO, then you'll probably know how the series is going to run. I think these two products are pretty good for starting out new players, but I think for competitive play, they're not too great. But I mean, of course, their only main purpose is to get new players started. A lot of the cards have really simple effects. If we take a look at the Blaster Blade trial deck, you have a lot of copies of this card, Crimson Butterfly Brigitte, which gives you plus 5,000 if you get a grade 3 on a drive check. That's pretty simple. I think the most complex it gets is when it gets to Solitary Knight Gancelot. You can counterblast 2. If you have Blaster Blade in your soul, you get plus 5 in a crit. And then also, if you have it in your hand, you can search your deck for Blaster Blade. So that's pretty neat. It combos pretty well with Blaster Blade, but sadly, the trial deck only gives you 1 Blaster Blade and 2 Solitary Knight Gancelot. So if you wanted to get a full set of both, you'd have to get 4 trial decks. Or if you're lucky enough, wait like 1 or 2 weeks for the first booster set and get lucky enough to pull Blaster Blades, but I don't think that's gonna happen. So your safest bet is to get 4 of these trial decks if you wanted to make it a little bit competitive. I guess you wouldn't really need 4, because when we get to Descent of the King of Knights later, you get Barkle, and Barkle can search out for Blaster Blade to ride, so I guess you don't need 4 right now. But down the road, once we get to Awakening of the Twin Blades, 4 is necessary. We're going to compare it to the Dragonic Overlord trial deck. You actually get 2 Dragonic Overlords instead of just 1 like in the Blaster Blade trial deck, so that's pretty neat. And what Dragonic Overlord does is you could pay Counterblast 3, and when it hits an opponent's rear guard, you can stand it up pretty much. So it is pretty limited on its attacks. It doesn't restand when attacking the Vanguard, but it's still pretty good. It's like a lot of pressure. If your opponent lets the attack through, it's just going to restand and attack again. And if it's on the Vanguard, that means you get another drive check. So that's pretty neat. Another good card is Dragon Monk Goku. It's not as good as Ashura Kaiser, I would say, when it comes to like drive check grade 3's abilities, but it's pretty decent for Kagero. The only thing that sucks about this card is that there aren't too many cards that benefit from retiring during the battle phase. A lot of the retiring bonuses that you get are during main phase, such as like cards like Blazing Flare Dragon, that one guy with the gun that comes out with this in the same set. You know what I'm talking about. The guys that get plus 3 when you retire during the main phase. Goku just doesn't do well with that one. Yaksha does pretty well though. If you retire during the main phase, you could superior ride this from your hand, so you could get a grade 3 on the field a turn earlier, and that's pretty big because grade 3s have Twin Drive, which means you get an extra card during your drive checks. Berserk Dragon's also pretty cool. They give you 4 of those, I think. It's pretty much like a Blaster Blade. Counterblast 2, get rid of a grade 2 or less rear guard. It's pretty neat. You can get rid of the back row pretty much. Blaster Blade's pretty limited to the cards that it can retire. Sure, if it's on the Vanguard, you can choose any rear guard, but if you place it on the rear guard, you have to retire a grade 2 or greater, which isn't too bad, but you can't really get rid of the back row, which is something that Berserk Dragon can do. Tejas is cool too. You can attack back row, so like later when you see like Lizard Soldier, Conroe, or Barkle, you can use Tejas, snipe it down. Pretty neat. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say for these deck lists. Let's go ahead and see what these decks would look like in action. Alright, we are here on Tabletop Simulator for Game 1 and the first game of the series. As you can see, we're using the Blaster Blade trial deck for Game 1. In my playtesting using this deck, I found that it was really difficult for me to win consistently. Even after our mulligan, I wasn't able to find Blaster Blade or Solitary Knight Gancelot. Without either of these cards, we're pretty much playing a vanilla game with no significant win condition. I decided to ride Wingull instead of Morgana because Wingull without Blaster Blade just ends up being a 6k vanilla. At least Morgana can give herself a power boost if we pitch a card. I did manage to draw Blaster Blade during the following draw phase, so that was pretty neat. Since we're so early in the game, I didn't want to put down so many cards. The opponent has ways to get rid of cards on my side of the field, so if I played all my cards from the get-go, they would all get destroyed. Unfortunately, I didn't draw Gancelot, but that's okay. Bridget isn't too bad. He pretty much turns all of our grade 3s into triggers. Here I was deciding how I should set up my field. Now that I've reached grade 3, I can start to push for more damage. Starlight Unicorn is actually a pretty nice card. It gives weaker columns the nudge they need to hit for good numbers. Boars is cool too. If you put Marion behind him, you've got a nice 21k column, if you use Boars' ability. Unfortunately, the opponent does check a defensive trigger. A defensive trigger can shut down a lot of early game rush attempts. Luckily for us, we do check a stand trigger, allowing us to restand Boars, but because our opponent's Vanguard is buffed by the defensive trigger, we're not going to be able to get in that additional attack. Stand triggers work well with clans that benefit from multi-attacks, but I think Royal Paladin and especially Kagero work better with critical triggers. I also have never played competitive Vanguard, so I might be completely wrong. Dragonic Overlord is going to be pretty annoying to deal with. It's only got 1000 more power than our Vanguard, but it does make a difference when it comes to attacking and defending. What's scary is that there's now a Tejas on both sides, so my opponent has almost my entire field on lockdown. At any point, my opponent could activate Dragonic Overlord's ability and attempt to attack into my front row, while the two Tejas swing at my back row. I did end up losing Starlight Unicorn, but I felt that it wasn't worth keeping anyways. I could probably use this chance to build better columns. I called another Starlight Unicorn, but I was debating whether I should give the power bonus to Tristan and make even 16k columns, or to Boars and make one big 21k column that would be hard for the opponent to guard against. I decided to give the power bonus to Boars, hoping that I could push the opponent to 4 damage and maybe draw Gancelot to finish the game on the next turn. Again, we're going to try to attack the Vanguard and get in as much damage as we can. We actually managed to push the opponent to 5 damage, which is pretty nice and also not nice. The cards in your damage zone also act as a resource, and a lot of abilities require you to flip over cards in your damage zone. This is what we refer to as counterblasts. So even though we did push our opponent to 5 damage, we also gave them more counterblasts to work with. Unfortunately, we are going to take a big hit since our opponent just checked the critical trigger. What's so threatening about critical triggers is that you might think you're safe at 3 damage, but as soon as your opponent checks a double critical, you're dead. No amount of plot armor is going to save you from that. I think had I guarded against Dragonic Overlord, I would have been able to keep one more card in my hand this turn, but now that Berserk Dragon is attacking for 22k, I'm going to have to use up 3 cards in my hand to guard against this attack. Fortunately, I can make myself even 16k columns, but let's be honest. With the opponent having 2 interceptors on the board and 6 cards in hand, I don't think I'm gonna get an attack through. This is what I meant when I said we would have a vanilla game. Nothing interesting has happened. Oh wait, we got a heal trigger, that's nice. At the very least, we did knock out a lot of cards from the opponent's hand. We also don't have to deal with 2 Tejases anymore, but I think at this point in the game, there's almost no point in attacking rear guards. Unless you're Dragonic Overlord, of course. During the recording, I was trying to conserve my hand to guard against the Tejas because I knew I could guard against that attack, but I didn't stop to think that letting Dragonic Overlord obliterate my field would give my opponent more chances to check a trigger. At this point, it was too late to try to stop Dragonic Overlord. I think had I stopped Dragonic Overlord's first attack on boards when I could have, I might have been able to turn the game around and win. But let's move on to Game 2. We had a pretty close Game 1, but we did end up losing. However, we can even up the score in Game 2. We're going to be switching over to the Dragonic Overlord trial deck. This deck is definitely a lot more consistent than the Blaster Blade trial deck. We're given multiple copies of almost everything we need besides Dragon Monk Goku. Goku is actually going to be my main ride target and not Dragonic Overlord. Dragonic Overlord can still use its ability on the rearguard circle, so it's not necessary to have it on the Vanguard circle. However, Goku has to be on the Vanguard circle for its effect to trigger. Goku is pretty much like Bridget, but instead of getting a power boost, we retire a grade 1 on our opponent's field. Here we ride Berserk Dragon. What's cool is that if we call down a Berserk Dragon during our main phase and retire an opponent's rearguard using its ability, we can actually use Demonic Dragon Berserker Yaksha's ability to superior ride from our hand. However, this would only work if our opponent were to play aggressively and rush us for 2 damage. The superior ride seems more like a catch-up mechanic in this case, but superior riding actually gets better once we get into the first booster set. Our opponent is actually going to call down Morgana to the front row and use her ability that I discussed in Game 1. This is not a bad play because the opponent can get rid of cards they don't need, such as an extra grade 3. One thing I didn't realize about Morgana's ability during the recording is that the power boost actually carries over until the end of the turn and not the end of the battle. This was a simple error by me, but I don't think it would have had any significant effect on the outcome of the match. Unfortunately, we don't have Goku or Dragonic Overlord in hand, so we are forced to ride Yaksha, but we do have units in hand to help us make good columns against a potential 10k Vanguard. Here I'm taking advantage of my opponent having a weak Vanguard by attacking him with Bar. If the opponent decided to guard, they would only have 2 cards left in their hand, and if the opponent lets the attack through like they did just now, we would get in for easy poke damage. It also looks like we're not going to see Gancelot use his ability during this game. Gancelot's ability requires Blaster Blade in the soul, but since the opponent rode into a grade 3 before riding Blaster Blade, which is a grade 2, they're not going to be able to get Blaster Blade into the soul. You can't ride a unit with a grade less than your current Vanguard's grade, but you can ride a unit of the same grade or higher. Here I want to mention why 1000 power makes all the difference in this game. Including the trigger that was just revealed, our opponent's right column now has a total of 19,000 power. For me to stop this attack, I would need 15,000 shield or 2 to 3 cards. But if my Vanguard had 10,000 power instead of 9,000 power, I would only need 10,000 shield or 1 to 2 cards to stop the attack. Because the attack was so big, I had no choice but to let the attack through. I also drew Goku during our last drive check, so we're gonna go ahead and ride him. I think Goku and Flame of Hope Aramo work really well together. If we get a grade 3 during our drive check, Goku can retire an opponent's grade 1 rear guard. And if the attack hit, then we can use Aramo's ability to discard the grade 3 we just drive checked and draw another card. We've actually built pretty nice columns. The 15k threshold is actually the highest this deck can go without using any abilities. It is possible for us to build 20k columns, however it would require a lot of counterblasts. Also, I did forget to resolve both Goku and Aramo's ability, but I did end up resolving Goku's ability during the end phase. I got rid of Marin instead of Morgana because now that I have a 10k Vanguard, I'm not worried about my opponent's 14k column. My opponent does place down another Marin but behind Boars, which is actually kind of scary. That column could even get over Dragonic Overlord. The 14k column is actually going to swing into my Nahalem, but I do have Yaksha in my hand to replace him. What sucks is that my opponent landed a stand trigger. Not only is that left column getting even stronger, but also Tristan is going to be able to restand and attack into Bar. Luckily, I'm going to be able to survive this turn, but I'm hoping to close out the game on my next turn. My opponent has potentially 4 cards that he can guard with, but I have knowledge on 3 of them. One is currently on the field, and the other 2 were revealed during the last drive check. We also got a heal trigger right there, so that's pretty cool. If we don't close out the game here, at least we'll be able to take 1 more hit on my opponent's next turn. I drew Berserk Dragon, which means I'm going to be able to get rid of Tristan, so now I only have to worry about whatever's in my opponent's hand. This was actually a questionable play now that I'm looking at it. I used Dragon Monk Gojo's ability to discard the Yaksha in my hand and draw one card, but I think I ended up weakening my hand. I was doing some math in my head here to see if it mattered where I placed Berserk Dragon and Tejas. After using Berserk Dragon's ability, the Demonic Dragon Madonna Joko in my field would gain 3000 power from retiring my opponent's rear guard. But this power bonus wouldn't matter since I wouldn't be able to get over that 20k threshold. I went ahead and built my columns as usual. If I want to close out the game here, I'm going to need all of my columns to be able to hit the Vanguard. I'm forced to put down the Gojo that I drew behind Tejas in order to finish that column. I know my opponent is capable of guarding at least one attack. I also know my opponent is going to have to let at least one attack through. Fortunately for us, we got a heal trigger on our drive check. The opponent now needs 15k shield to guard against Berserk Dragon, which means the card we don't have knowledge of would have to have 10k shield. Even if my opponent does somehow survive this turn, I am in a pretty good position being at 3 damage. It looks like our opponent is not going to be able to guard against this attack, so we're going to take Game 2. We're going to be sticking with the Dragonic Overlord Child deck for Game 3. I did consider having a mirror match where both me and my opponent would use the same child deck, but I'm letting the opponent use the Blaster Blade child deck again, just to prove that the Dragonic Overlord child deck is more consistent. I'm hoping that we can also see Gancelot's ability in action. Neither side has been able to draw Gancelot yet, and I want to be able to show off what both decks are capable of. Also, I'm going to try to change up which side goes first in future episodes so that I'm not always going first. Here we drew Gojo during our draw phase, and I was looking at my hand to see if there were any cards that I could get rid of to draw another card. I already have Goku in my hand, so there's no reason for me to keep Yaksha, and despite drawing into another Yaksha, it's good to just thin out the deck anyways. It looks like my opponent didn't have Blaster Blade in their hand. You'll notice that they actually had 2 Gancelots in hand at the beginning of the ride step. Even though they could use one of those Gancelots to search for Blaster Blade, they're not going to be able to perform the search until after the ride step and during the main phase. Now that I know that the opponent has Blaster Blade in their hand, I don't want to call any units that would be valuable to me, such as Dragonic Overlord. I also have to watch how my opponent plays out their next turn. If they ride Blaster Blade on their next turn, then I know for sure that the opponent has Gancelot in their hand, which they do. But if they ride straight to grade 3, then I know that they don't have another Gancelot in their hand, which they do. Yes, I do have knowledge on both players' hands, but I also don't have any friends to play Vanguard with. Please don't hate me. We're gonna be using Gojo's ability again. This time we drew into Ermo, which is pretty nice. We're also gonna start building our columns. I'm not worried about attacking Tristan or sniping Morgana because that column isn't strong enough to pose a threat against me. It's definitely a lot easier to build columns in the Dragonic Overlord child deck. A majority of the columns in the Blaster Blade child deck end up having a grade 3 in the front row and a grade 1 in the back row. Aside from Blaster Blade and Knight of Silence Galatine, the grade 2 lineup sucks. We're gonna see the opponent riding into Blaster Blade, which probably means they have Gancelot in their hand. I think staying at grade 2 for another turn is a small price to pay for being able to have access to Gancelot's ability. It doesn't seem like my opponent is able to make any good columns. At the very least, they could put down any grade 1 unit behind Blaster Blade and have that column be able to swing over the 15k threshold, but since my opponent didn't call anything down, I can assume that they don't have any grade 1s in their hand, at least not before they drew Little Sage Marin in their drive check just now. I also forgot to resolve Goku's effect again, but it probably wouldn't have changed the outcome of the match at all. We're finally going to see Gancelot hit the field for the first time with Blaster Blade in the soul. It would be a lot scarier for me if I were sitting at 3 damage, but we're chilling with just 1 damage at the moment. Even if my opponent had a full board, I could probably let all the attacks through and I still wouldn't lose, unless of course my opponent checks a critical trigger. Looking at the Dragonic Overlord in my hand, I'm actually going to let the opponent get in at least 2 damage this turn, that way I'll have enough cards in my damage zone to use Dragonic Overlord's ability. Attacking my Nuthallam is a good move. Even if my opponent can't finish me on this turn, at least they won't have to deal with Nihalem on the next turn. I went ahead and let Gancelot land the attack on me. Even if they check a double critical, I'm not going to lose here because I have enough cards in my hand to guard against the next attack. We are going to get slammed for 3 damage though. I did make a mistake here during my recording. I forgot to add the power bonus from the trigger to Boars and thought the column was still at 16,000. And since I had checked 2 defensive triggers, I assumed the attack wouldn't go through. So instead of attacking the Vanguard, the attack was directed at Bar instead. I guess this sort of cancels out the mistake I made earlier. Had I remembered to use Goku's effect, Morgana would have been retired anyways, so technically Boars wouldn't have been able to hit my Vanguard anyways, even with the power bonus. Also on the opponent's side, I made the mistake of letting Dragonic Overlord run over the rear guards. The same mistake that I made on my side in game 1. Anyways, I know what cards are in my opponent's hand because they were revealed during the drive check. To be able to win on this turn, we're gonna need to get a trigger on our drive check. We didn't get any triggers, but I did remember to use Goku's effect this time. No matter what the opponent draws on the next turn, with a hand of 45,000 shield, I'm still going to be able to defend against my opponent's attacks, and end the game on my next turn. That's gonna do it for game 3. I did make a few mistakes here and there, but on the whole it was really fun and refreshing to just revisit the OG Vanguard format. Moving forward, we're gonna have access to all the cards included in the trial decks we use in today's episode. I'm really excited for the next episode because we're gonna start opening booster packs, starting with Descent of the King of Knights. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed today's episode and want to see more, be sure to hit that like button because your support is greatly appreciated. And I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Peace out.